Well, in Nehemiah chapter 5, we're going to learn a lot about him and his leadership style and how he went about doing things for the Jews, basically. So, verse 1, and there was a great cry of the people and of their wives against their brethren, the Jews. So, these are people that are complaining about some Jews complaining about other Jews, basically. Verse 2, for there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters, are many. Therefore we take up corn for them that we may eat and live. Some also there were that said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses that we might buy corn because of the dearth, meaning the dearth is basically a famine. There's probably a drought happening, so crop failures, other problems are possibly happening. That's very common to have happened. So there are people that are saying, look, some people going, look, we're growing food to try to feed our families, and others saying we're trying to buy food from those who grow it to feed our families too. And it says, verse 4, in fact, it says, we mortgaged our lands. We're so in debt, we've borrowed against our property to keep alive, to keep feeding ourselves. Verse 4, there were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. So what that means is the king's tribute is basically taxes. They are borrowing money to pay the tax. That's a bad situation. I mean, economically, that is horrible. It's one thing to have cash, have the coinage to say, okay, here's the portion that's the king's tax. I hate that because it leaves me with less. But when you have none and still have to pay a king's tax, that's even worse. That is terrible. So really bad economic system that they're dealing with right now. Verse 5, yet now our flesh is as the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons and our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought unto bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. So they're even selling their children into slavery to pay for their debts. Sounds crazy in our day and age, but this is actually a common practice back then. If you owed somebody a debt, sometimes you would give them one of your children to pay the debt back. When that debt was paid back, sometimes that child would try to find you and come back and live with you, or they would just go on their own. But they're selling their children into slavery because they've already mortgaged their house, they've mortgaged their land, they owe taxes, they owe all this money, and they still can't survive. They're still struggling like crazy. So they're selling their children to try to keep themselves alive. Do we all starve to death, or do we sell one kid off and the rest of us have some food to live for a little bit longer? It's crazy. Verse 6, and I was very angry when I heard their cry and these words. Then I consulted with myself, and I rebuked the nobles and the rulers, and said unto them, ye exact usury or interest, every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. So it's just, you got to understand, okay, so the Jews have been back for a while, for many, many years. Nehemiah shows up with the blessing of the king of Persia, Artaxerxes the first, and so he has instant clout because he is somewhat a government representative. So this is kind of like a federal government representative coming in and realizing that all of the state and county leadership are basically hurting the people. Like the taxes that people have to pay are so onerous that the average person is struggling while the nobles have money. And now they have all this land and they have all this ability to build wealth for themselves because the system is unfair against the people. So Nehemiah gets pissed and he says, this is stupid. You shouldn't do this. And so because he's coming from a place of power as being a connection with the king, he kind of gets these people rallied up. The people have been feeling this way for a long time, but they haven't had a way to exercise anything about it. Because what are they going to do? They're going to start to revolt, but then the leaders have the army, and they just bring an army in and wipe them all out. So they didn't feel they had that power, that opportunity to share their opinion and get their voice out. So now Nehemiah comes in and says, this is wrong. This is bad. And so now the people realize they have someone they can rally behind, and now they have an opportunity to voice their opinion and to rally together to go against their local rulers. And he says, verse 8, and I said unto them, we after our ability have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto the heathen. And will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be sold unto us? Then held they their peace and found nothing to answer. So when he challenged the local leadership of the Jews, basically they wouldn't, they said no comment, because any comment they made would be used against them, basically, because it's like, look, your people are selling their children to pay you the tax. Would you be the one responsible for selling your own people into slavery? That goes against such this idea of the tribalism and the culture and the connection of being together, that it while it's somewhat indirect, still the effect is these nobles are causing this to happen. So in a way, they're responsible for it, and they didn't like that when Nehemiah is pointing this out. Like, well, when you put it that way, it sounds like we're a bunch of jerks. Is probably what they were thinking in their mind, and they'd be right. Verse 9. Also I said, it is not good that ye do. Ought ye not to walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen, our enemies? So he's saying you guys need to have more faith in God, and you need to be better at relying on him. Verse 10, I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact of them money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this usury. So what he said right there is really interesting, okay? Because he says, look, he says, we are representatives of the king. We have a right to make them feed us, to pay a tax and a tribute to us, to sustain us and feed us and take care of us. But we're not. We're not taking a salary. We're not getting compensated for coming here to help you, basically, to help rebuild the wall and rebuild Jerusalem. We're relying on what we brought. We're relying on our own resources. We're not living off the people, basically. So verse 11, restore, I pray you, to them even this day their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, and their houses, also the 100th part of the money and of the corn and the wine and the oil that ye exact of them. So he's telling these local leaders, basically, you need to give back what you've taken from these people. If you've taken their land, forgive the debt and give them their land back. Give them their houses back. Give them all that stuff back. That's what you need to be doing. Verse 13, he says here, verse 12, then said they, we will restore them and will require nothing of them. So will we do as thou sayest. Then I called the priests and took an oath of them that they should do according to this promise. So the local leaders realize they're stuck. They're guilty. And so they say, okay, yes, we'll play nice. We'll play fair and give them back their lands and their things, basically. So Nehemiah's had a profound effect on helping these people out. Let's see, verse 13, also I shook my lap and said, so God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that performeth not this promise. Even thus he be shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said, Amen, and praised the Lord. And the people did according to this promise. Now this promise is basically, look, if you're not standing up and being honest in your dealings and doing the work that you need to do, as far as I'm concerned, God can kick you out. Just as I'm shaking off my lap to get everything off of it, you need to reprioritize your life. You need to be honest with yourself and honest in other people. You need to treat people better. And that's what they said, okay, we agreed to do this. Verse 14, moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year even unto the 32nd year of our tax race to king, that is, 12 years, I and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor. So he got appointed as the governor of the area, and he's not taking the salary, if you will, of the governor, which is eating. They get so much bread and so much food from the people given to them as a tax that supports him. He's living off of what he has and what he can do for himself, not what the people can give him. And this is interesting, kind of compared with King Benjamin in the Book of Mormon as well, when he said in his great speech, I haven't asked of you to support me. I have subsisted on my own lands. I grew my own garden, basically, is what he's telling people. I grew my own garden. I took care of my own animals. I fed myself. I didn't need to rely on your money to feed me. is what he's doing. And that's what Nehemiah is doing here too, basically. Verse 15, but the former governors that had been before me were chargeable unto the people. So chargeable basically means that he was laying a heavy burden on the people. Basically, he was taxing them too much and living off the tax. And they had taken of them bread and wine, beside 40 shekels of silver, yea, even their servants bare rule over the people. But so did I not, because of the fear of God. Yea, also I continued in the work of this wall, neither bought we any land, and all my servants were gathered thither unto the work. Moreover, there were at my table 150 of the Jews and rulers, besides those that came unto us from among the heathen that are about us. Now that which was spread before me daily was 1 ox and 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me. Once in 10 days, score of all sorts of wine. Yet for all this required not I the bread of the governor, because of the bondage was heavy upon this people. Think upon me, my God, for good, according to all that I have done for this people. So what Nehemiah is saying here is basically that he's saying that, he still had feast, he still had plenty, but he didn't get it because he taxed to the people. The people kept their stuff and he had his stuff. He had servants that probably took care of animals for the governor. Basically, they had a garden. They probably had their own stuff. And that's how they got taken care of, was out of their own work, their own efforts, basically. So really cool, good principle for us to learn in leadership too, of it's not us to lean on and live off the activities of the others, but work together. We're all in this together. Let's help each other out. Let's not try to live off of each other's efforts, basically. So let's jump into chapter 6 as we continue the story.